You know, white people, by and large, they don't know what it's like to be occupied by a police force. They don't understand it because it's not their type of experience with police. Because they are treated like individuals. They believe that if they are not breaking the law, then they will not be abused. Well, that's not my experience of the police. I'm not a criminal just because I'm black, nor am I someone who doesn't want to live in a safe community. Yet many of us cannot trust the people who have been charged and sworn to keep our communities and us safe. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. I constantly saw the police. Oftentimes, they were white. They would stop us and harass us just because they could. We would see the police all the time in our neighborhood, but they never would speak to us. The only time we had an interaction with the police is when they were about to jack us up. You see, the police made a conscious decision not to treat us fairly because they didn't care about us. One time when I was 15 years old, me and a few of my friends, we were just hanging out on the block. It was summertime. We wasn't doing anything. When all of a sudden a black and white unit slowly pulled up. Two white officers jumped out of the car and demanded that we stop where we are, get up against the car, put your hands on the hood, and do not move. It seemed like we were holding on to the hood of that car for an eternity. Well, I lifted up my right hand and just touched my face, put my hand back on the hood of the car. I remember being grabbed from behind and put in a chokehold by one of the police officers, and then he whispered in my ear, "I told you not to move, didn't I?" He lifted my 15-year-old body up off the ground, and he held me in that position until I passed out. I was only 15 years old. I hadn't done anything wrong, and yet I was placed in a chokehold by a white police officer. How do you think that made me feel? This is one of my experiences with white supremacy, racism, and anti-blackness in America. But it's not my only experience of racism. But it's one that I think about a lot, especially these last few weeks, while we're in this climate of police violence on black bodies in 2020. As I watched George Floyd being choked until his life was taken, it reminded me of what could have happened to me all those many years ago. Today, I'm responsible member of society. And I know for a fact that calling the police, I could be inviting in someone who does not like me and does not care about my life. White people need to remember this the next time you think about calling the police on another black person. This is why we need police reform all across these United States. We need to ban all forms of chokeholds. We need to ban no-knock warrants. We need to prosecute and arrest killer and abusive cops. We are sick and tired of watching our people being lynched at the hands of rogue and racist police officers. It shouldn't be like this. Black lives matter.
God has been disturbing my soul for the last few weeks with a word from John's Gospel. Jesus said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." On Pentecost Sunday, I was part of an ecumenical prayer protest in Pasadena. We held a loud lament for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, remembering the time that George Floyd was held to the ground, knee on his carotid artery, creating pressure on his esophagus, his very breath crushed from him. I kept looking at my colleague who was timing, thinking surely we could stop. The last couple of minutes were excruciating. Before me, one young woman folded to the ground in sobs, but the seconds ticked on. When over finally, there was a silence. And in that moment, I remembered Jesus breathed on his disciples and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." And I was convicted by that breath, by that status quo disrupting power of God's breath. In these months of living with the pandemic, the intersections of class, race, economics, and healthcare have been clearly visible. We saw it first in those that blame Chinese Americans, then any Asian American, for bringing this pandemic on the rest of us. And in these last few weeks, the evil of racism and the violence that comes with it has been so starkly revealed. While racism in this country is far-reaching, whether towards Native peoples or immigrants from many other non-white countries, we especially have seen again and again that to live and to be Black in this nation is to be at risk at all times, no matter station or status, no matter whether you are jogging, sitting at home, bird watching, or shopping. From neighbors to law enforcement officers, your life is marked as suspect, dangerous. Today I want to speak primarily to my fellow white United Methodists. We like to believe that we are not racist. But no matter how well-intentioned we are, no matter how woke we are to the insipid nature of racism, we have to finally acknowledge that we benefit from the color of our skin. The depth and breadth of racism actually makes it impossible for us not to be racist. For racism is the environment in which we live and breathe. We have to face that reality, not make excuses, not look for loopholes or examples of oppression or hardship that we have had in our own life. No, it's simply a fact that racism is as American as apple pie. And as white folks, we benefit from its effects. This morning, I want to suggest just a few places that we might begin to address this reality. Now, these are not clever or new. They, in fact, are frightfully basic. And it pains me, to be honest, that for some of us, these will still feel threatening and difficult. Well, first we have to stop saying, "I can't believe in this day and age that something like this could happen." People of color live with the sure and certain knowledge that stuff like this happens every single day in every part of the country and at every level of the church. Then we need to learn to listen. Not listen so we can come up with statements about how we don't participate in or are privileged by racism. For every time we try to make ourselves an exception to the truth of that reality, we actually perpetuate the system. And we need to put down our defensiveness, and we need to listen so that we can gain deeper understanding and develop true empathy. We also need to educate ourselves about the systemic nature of racism. Now, in 2020, this shouldn't have to be said, but many of us simply have not paid attention. We need to learn about the macroaggressions, like the murder of George Floyd, but also about the daily microaggressions that we ignore or more often don't even notice. We need to learn not to seek to be non-racist. That just really isn't possible. But so we can move to becoming anti-racist. Learning that leads to our inner transformation and strengthens our courage to speak and act is critical. Now, I know in the midst of the virus and with all the uncertainty we are living with now, this might just feel like one thing too many to face. But therein lies the reality of white privilege. Those of us who are white have the choice to say, "I cannot deal with this today." For our family, our neighbors of color, that isn't a choice. then we also have to look around at the communities in which we live. Where are there groups who are addressing the realities of racism? I mean, are there people beginning to work on new ways to address community safety? Find those groups, support them, join them. And lastly, we need to get out of the way. We have to step aside from directing, designing, and determining how we will dismantle racism. We need to grow our awareness so we become better allies and, yes, better foot soldiers. But leading the way, I am convinced, will best be done by those who have the deep generational experience of how racism actually operates. Now, we white folks are going to make mistakes, sometimes big ones. We may well get called out, even in public, for those mistakes. I mean, I admit I struggle with this video because I realized I was getting worried about being called out, of causing more harm because of the embedded racism of which, even after all these years, I am still not aware. But we have to learn to get our egos out of the way, hear the critiques that will most certainly come, and then reflect on what we learned and what we might do and how we can do it differently. And then we have to keep on going. I do believe the Spirit is churning the church, calling on us to bear witness and to engage in the work that proclaims that the sins of personal and systemic racism must be named and they must be uprooted. We have a chance now to rise up as people worthy of the name disciple of Jesus. Breathe on us, Jesus. Breathe. Come, Holy Spirit.